Hey folks, welcome to Dr. Vrooman's Introduction to PowerPoint. You're either one of my students desperate to figure out how to start and or what I want, or you're an innocent victim of the internet who found this by someone sharing it, or you stumbled across my YouTube channel or whatever it might be, and here you are and you want to know how to get started on PowerPoint. Our goal here today is to give you a kind of quick sort of guide to how to get started, especially if the only thing you've ever done with PowerPoint before is like read other people's PowerPoints, so to get you started and having control and making your own decisions. My philosophy of PowerPoint is that most PowerPoints are bad, and most PowerPoints are bad for a lot of reasons, but the primary one is that we don't really feel like we're in control of PowerPoint and know how to make PowerPoint decisions. And then if we were to make a PowerPoint decision, how we could make the software do the things that we want it to do. So I want to make sure that you know how things work. And then along the way, you'll get a little bit of my design philosophy. But whatever your design philosophy, you should know how the system works so that you can make decisions. If you're making decisions, that's better than not making decisions. So what are we going to do today? We're going to do three things. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about the basic setup of PowerPoint, how to start on a slide and make it work. The second thing is organizers. How do you take multiple slides together and organize that experience in a meaningful way? And last, images. Once you have a structure, how do you take those things and those slides and make them more interesting? And how do you use the images or sort of like any kind of visual element to make your visual aids visual, right? That's our goal. So the basic setup of a slide, a whole set of slides, and the visual environment. That's what we're going to do, and each of these is going to take, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes. We'll find out how we do it. There'll be chapters in the video, and you'll be able to see. But that's our goal, right? Okay, so what do we do with all that, and where do we go from here? That's the fun part. So we're going to exit out of this, and then you'll see how I built it a little bit. We're going to open up our new slide, and you'll be able to see how PowerPoint starts. And so here we are on the basic setup. And you'll notice that the shine on my glasses is enormous. And that's just because the white is so much. So if that gives you a sense of the power of just a giant white screen and why it's horrible, it's a lot visually to throw at people. Whereas before with the black, you could sort of see things emerge out of nowhere. And it's kind of more restful for your eyes and it's good. And then I can throw things at you visually that are interesting, but you're not just overwhelmed looking at bright, 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 bright for a long time, right? And so also if you had a blank slide, which you saw me have a blank slide at the beginning, it looks like it's gone as opposed to this bright white thing, right? So this will give you a sense of where we're at. So when you start with PowerPoint, you see this. And so here we are on basic design. How do we deal with this one individual slide? And where do we go from there? The first thing is you should already know a little bit about what you're going to talk about. Hopefully you have the whole idea, your whole structure of your presentation plan. I know a lot of people who sit down to do PowerPoint and they're like, okay, I'm going to talk, okay. And then I'll make another new slide and here we go, and here we go. And it's like, well, really though? Like, is this the way you're supposed to build PowerPoint? Or is this just like you opened the software and it did these things? And then you're like, this is boring. Let me do this. Okay. Is that the right way to do it? Like, and I'm going to design each one. Like, is this the right choice? And it's not. It's a terrible way to build, right? That PowerPoint sort of space. But we don't know any better necessarily. So we're going to just sort of get rid of these. And then in case you ever get lost in these, like the spider web, yeah, you're being sucked in to be like what the blood sucked out of you, is you can head over here and generally get rid of it and make it basic again. We're going to get rid of designer. So like this is in the design menu. Let me make sure you can actually see the design menu when I click it. Yeah. And generally this is what you're using. And then here is always the basics, right? And so if there's stuff on there when you switch to basics, you don't under, so if I click this one, for example, oh no, that's not very good. So I can click down here to this drop down. I can go back to the basics and we're good. But if you click over here on the right side designer menu, you may have to delete some of that material as you go. So we're just going to get rid of the designer and have it stop telling us what to do. And you'll see here we have this general layout, right? If we go back to insert a new slide, you can kind of see what PowerPoint usually gives us. Our good job now is to change this, right? Now, maybe you want a title at the top. Maybe you want a bunch of stuff in the middle. Why do we do that? Because the PowerPoint originators back in the 90s built it this way. So it would look like a book, right? You know how books have little chapter things on the top and then they have text on the bottom? Is reading a book together the best way to give a speech? No, but we've been stuck for like 30 years of this terror. And we just think, well, that's just useful. People are used to reading my slide or whatever. But, you know, is that really where we want to go? So we're going to change that. So we can change that by heading over here to layout. You can also head over here and do some of that stuff here in other areas of PowerPoint as we go. But in general, the layout, they make it sort of difficult for you to figure out. It's over here on the home screen. You can change the layout. Or we can right click over here. And I'm just going to go blank. We're just going to make it blank. Why are we going to make it blank? Because I want to decide where everything goes. I'm going to look at this blank canvas and decide what it looks like and where I put things and how things are going to fit. And I'm also going to format the background. So I can right click on this to format the background. Or if I head over here to design, I can go over to the top and I can format the background. And I want to format it as a solid color, and I'm going to format it as black for you. Now, you can have texture, you can have other kinds of things on here, but I want to just start with a blank slate. Sorry, you can hear the trash outside. I want to start with a blank slate so that you can figure out what you want to put on those things as you go. So that's how you start with the slide. Now, there's a lot of ways to begin to make decisions about what goes on a slide. One of the things I like to do is create a kind of coherent design space on a slide so that everything kind of fits as I go slide to slide. And then I like to generally just sort of copy that all over so that everything has the same structure. So this is very much a tool from a kind of visual design perspective in terms of like the way you would design a website or the way you would design a flyer. Oftentimes you work with a kind of sense of proportion, you work with a sense of measurement, and you work with a kind of table of where things go. And so what I want to do is I want to start by inserting tables so that we can sort of like anchor things together, and so that as we move from slides, everything is in control. The good thing about the PowerPoint design template is that everything is always in the same spot because PowerPoint forces you to put it in one spot. But what if you want it in different spots? How do you know whether it's going to stay the same? If you use text boxes, sometimes they sort of move around on the screen in ways that you're not sure about because they're easy to pick up as you're mousing over things. It's easy to like accidentally drag a text box in one way, and you don't want to do that. So what we want instead is to be able to manage our text boxes in a better way. So let's not use text boxes. We're instead going to use the old design sort of cheat of using a table. Now this is over in the insert menu, and I don't think that you can do it in the right click menu, but there we go, insert, and we're going to insert a table. How many things are we going to insert, right? And so if you're following along at home, I don't know, like let's start with 7. I like an odd sort of number of table spaces. You'll see why in a second, but I'm going to do 7 by 5. You can do whatever you like. I'm using widescreen as is the default in usually screens in front of rooms now are widescreen, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now you're all familiar with this look of a PowerPoint table. We don't want this look at all. It arbitrarily formats the table in a strange way, and we want the table to become a design template, not our boss, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to leave a bit of a margin. Now you can do this by sizing in the more like intensive menus where you have it, make sure you're equidistant from all the sides and stuff like that. But, for most of our purposes, just sort of like eyeballing it is reasonable at this stage, as long as everything is the same eyeball. Note I don't go to the edge. We need a margin. Oftentimes in rooms, the edges of the screen are either out of focus if it's a bad projector, or you don't know that the screen is big enough to hold everything. It's just better to avoid them. Now this looks ugly, so how do we make it invisible? Well, the thing about PowerPoint is up here there's a secondary menu system that when you click something, it brings it up. Right? So when you click an object on your PowerPoint screen, now I don't have any objects, it brings up options. Often it's just one, but sometimes it's 2. And in this case, when I click onto a table, it gives me a design menu and it gives me a table layout menu. The layout menu is really a lot about alignment and other kinds of things and adding columns and things like that. The table design element allows us to do some stylistic elements to it. So I'm going to just select the whole table. And what I'm going to do in terms of shading is I'm going to make it invisible. Instead of filling it with black, I just want it to go away a little bit. Right? And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to borders. I'm going to click the borders away. Right? The borders menu lets you do all kinds of different borders on these cells. I just want them to go away because I want us to be able to decide where things go. Now there's other ways to design the visual space of a PowerPoint slide. I just find this to be simplest, especially if you're new to designing a slide, right? And so we're going to start there. Now the other thing though, if we need to put text in here, is that they have it built so that the top is in bold and they're in different sort of font sizes. So the other decision I want to make, once we're at table design and we get rid of the shading and get rid of the borders, is I want to head over here and work on the font. Now, Calibri is the normal sort of like font. Now, Aptos for some reason on this one, but usually it's like Calibri. These default fonts that everything is in. But, there's a lot of fonts, and you don't have to pick like the Scooby-Doo font or whatever. But I think that you should make a decision about a font that's not the default. In general, I would suggest using a sans serif font if we can discover what that is, right? Which is, here's some text, right? That's one of those fonts, right? And if we were to grab this text and put it over here next to it, and we're going to do like something like Times New Roman, well, we'll just grab this one. Oh, it didn't work. Let's try it again. We're still on Aptos. We're going to go ahead and grab here, right? And we'll make it bigger so that's more of a normal comparison. But one of the things that we know kind of about fonts, and I know there's a spelling error thing on here, is that fonts with serifs are these little tiny hash marks at the top and the bottom, which you're designed around, like, and you read a book, everything looks like that. Those serifs are designed to make your eye move across the page better in terms of print, and I think that works. But on a screen, even a high resolution screen, your brain, because you're working with light as opposed to a static page with ink on it, your brain wants to connect the things together, and it makes too many connections a little bit. That's part of how we process using light as opposed to not light as a source. There's a lot of sort of science in that, but just sort of, I'm just asking you to trust me, but you can look it up. But this is harder to read on a screen than this, right? Which is why your phones all default to this kind of font. So we want to pick a font in that family, and then we want to adjust and make all the text the same. So the first thing we'll do is we'll toggle bold off and on so that it's gone, and then we're going to head over and find our font. Now I have one that I like, and it's this one. And then we'll figure out what size we need, right? And so now we have a kind of table that's invisible. And what I'll generally do then is I'll copy it and I'll make the whole PowerPoint that. Now, obviously now it's changed our color, so we're going to have to fix it. Now, generally over time, you'll find a default, and on your computer you'll fix it. But I'm just going to format the background on all of them, and now I have a nice little table. Okay, cool. So I can have it blank, but I can also put things on it. All right, so that's how we start a slide. And now I can put things on here and plan where they go. Does it need to be this many grids? No, it doesn't need to be. Can you use a text box if you had to? For sure. I just find it a lot easier to organize the space in terms of using these kinds of things. For those of you who are more advanced, you can lock objects and you can do a variety of things that make this easier, but I'm trying not to overwhelm people who have never done anything on a slide before. All right, so we're going to begin sliding over to the question of organizers for you here in just a second, and so that's kind of where we're at. And I would bring up the little slide that said organizers if you want. Here we go. See how helpful it is to know? And that's what an organizer does. It shows up and it lets you know there's a visual cue that we're moving on to something else, and it's super helpful. Okay, so let's say we were going to give a presentation on the good, the bad, and the ugly of PowerPoint, right? We're just giving a basic kind of sort of like entry-level sort of analysis of what's going on. With a seven boxes, I can give you a 4 main point speech pretty easy. I can also give you a 3 main point speech pretty easy because 7 is 3 plus 4 anyway. So we're going to do the good, the bad, and the ugly of PowerPoint. So let's say those are our 3 points, right? Oh, I forgot. We have to change the font so that it's visible. We have the good, we have the bad, and we have the ugly. All right. Now, is that big enough? Maybe not. Let's make it a little larger. I'm going to take the whole thing and make it a little larger. That seems all right. That seems pretty decent. And I also, though, if you look, it's justified to the left, so it's not in the center. Let me center those so that they look kind of centered. Now, theoretically, that bad should be centered in the frame. It looks weird because I've got the other stuff over there on the side, and it seems a little odd. Now, I've already done this thing where I copied the table multiple times. That was just for show. I'm going to make sure I have everything together, and then work with it from here so that I'm copying the same organizer space throughout. Okay, so let's back up. What are organizers? These are the main points of your speech, and your goal is to help people understand as you're moving through the presentation what you're doing next. And often PowerPoint just has titles on the top, which is kind of like breadcrumbs, right? Like I kind of know, like on a website at the top, you kind of know where you're going, sort of, but it's easy to get lost in the flow and forget what the major points are. So even if you're going to title slides, I would suggest having some kind of organizer space that looks different, that stands out, that shows people, oh, okay, we're moving from one thing to another. Because the thing is, people have a hard time paying attention. Maybe you found yourself phasing in and out of consciousness during this presentation. Whether the speaker's boring or not, we just can't really process for that long that intensely. So because we're going to fluctuate in and out of attention, I find some sort of visual cue to help people catch back up is important, right? And you've all been in that place where somebody's like, okay, on number 4, and you're like, wait, I'm on number 1, because you weren't paying attention. Whereas if they gave you something big to show you, here we go, it's get your attention. And so there's lots of ways to do that, right? You can do this with text, which is what we're doing here, which is the simplest, but it's also the most boring. But still, we need to know how it works, and I want to make sure that you do know how it works. Right? So there's a couple ways to do this. I will believe that at the beginning of a presentation, you should have a simplified organizational pattern that's memorable. It's by the time you get to like more than 5 points, arguably maybe more than 7, it's hard for us to remember those like later. Like if I was to be like, what was Dr. Vrooman's main points? I have 3. You could probably generate them if you needed to. But if I had 12, you wouldn't. So if I had 12, I would have to nest those points into a larger sort of subject matter, right? And so good, the bad, and the ugly is kind of vague, but it's memorable, right? Because you've heard this before, even if you don't know it's from a Clint Eastwood movie or whatever in the 60s. But the good, the bad, and the ugly is the thing that we know. And if I wanted to talk about things about PowerPoint, I could take all my points and organize them under these categories, right? And so if I want to talk about some good things, I'm just going to list off a few good things that might be there. PowerPoint can be pretty and it could be clear. Some of the bad things is it can repeat. Obviously, because I built this structure this way, I have to make sure that the words are a little smaller, but it can repeat, and it can be extra long. And then what's ugly is I'm going to say like clip art, and what else do I not like? I'm going to talk about stock photos. Oh no, I broke it. All right, well, because this is like a lower level sort of thing, we're going to do this. So that these are all the things that we're going to say about PowerPoint, this. But I want to organize it in a way that doesn't make you have to remember 6 things. In fact, if I ask you tomorrow, what do we talk about, you wouldn't be able to remember, you might remember clip art because it's specific and I'm going to show you pictures, but you might not remember pretty, right? You might not, but you'll remember good, bad, and the ugly. And then if I say, okay, what was bad? You'll be like, well, I think he talked about, what did he talk about? But you'll be able to find it. You'll be able to retrieve the memory easier as you go. So what have I done here? I've got my main points and I've got my subpoints, and I've shrunk the subpoints a little bit here because, partly because I use too many words. I would maybe adjust the size of these columns a little bit, but I think this is probably a reasonable size to see. Okay, so now this is the organizational structure for the entire presentation. Every point that I have is going to fit into this structure. So now I'm going to copy this slide, and what I'm doing is I grab the slide, by the way, for those of you, and you can either use the menu up here for copy, you can use the menu on right-click to copy. I just use Control-C, right? And so, so now what you can't see it because it's white on white, right? And so I'm going to go over here again and format our background and make it black so that every slide is the same. Okay, why do we do that? Well, on our first slide here, we want this to be our introduction, and so we're not going to organize yet. Because usually you start a presentation, you start with your introduction, and then you give us the preview at the end. Okay, here's our preview. Now I'm going to get rid of this part. I think you should, and you can delete this, or you can, just to remember what you're doing, you can just make it look like the background. At the beginning of the presentation, to make us remember your 3 main points, I can't give you all this stuff at once. I have to just give you a little bit. If I give you a little bit, you can remember it. If I give you this, it's too much. So in your preview for your speech, it should be, we're going to do the good, the bad, and the ugly of PowerPoint. That's it. That's it. That's all I need. Don't be like, we're going to do the good, including pretty and clear, and the bad, including repetition. You've lost me already. Give me something simple, and then make it more complicated later. So how are we going to do that? Well, for example, let's build some transitions. So these are your organizers. This is the section we're talking about with the organizers. This is how you organize your speech. Now, how do we translate this organization to our audience? Well, okay. So if here's my preview and I move on to my first main point, well, for sure I want this to go away. Okay. The other thing is I don't know that I want you to focus on this just yet. Okay. Whoops, I missed it. So we're going to do it like this. Maybe this is what I want. All right, let's look at it in big screen and see how it feels. Let's look at it in big screen, right? We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of PowerPoint. And to do that, we're first going to focus on the good. Okay, ready? So we're going to look at what's pretty and what's clear. Okay, right? Or I could even just get rid of this part. Maybe I'm like, it's clear enough. Let's try it again. Let's take a look. This is the kind of thing you should do. You should look at your stuff and see how it works. Good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's talk about the good. And when we talk about the good, what we mean is we mean that it can be pretty and it can be clear, and that's enough, right? And then I talk about being pretty, then I talk about it being clear, and then what do I do? Okay, so one of the things I'll do is I'll copy this slide again, and again, what you would do is you'd probably set the default here or whatever, so I don't have to keep doing that. So I have all these different pieces as we go. Now maybe I have a really long speech, and this needs to show up a bunch of times. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Just wait, just wait, just wait. I'm grabbing all these and we'll see how it goes. If I have a really long, like I'm a professor and I've got a really long presentation and you just gotta, oh my gosh, you gotta deal with it all. Well, here's what it might look like. Inside out to outside in kind of is the idea. And then over here, I will keep it simple again. All right, so like here's the entire interactional structure. By the way, this is when people are like, how many slides do I need? I'm like, there's no such thing as a slide. There's only interactional moments. And all this stuff kind of flows. And this is a lot of slides. Now you can do this with timing and animations on one slide, but I find it harder to edit at that point. This is much easier, I think, to deal with. And in the meantime, just so you can see how much fun it is, I'm going to Control A and grab the entire thing. And I'm going to head over here to transitions and do something simple. Now don't do something horrible like random bars or all this stuff that like highlights itself. Again, if you need a transition to highlight itself, use one of these, but you want it always to be falling over. And those exist because the slides themselves are so boring, you need something to help you out. But instead, let's just fade so that it's simple. All right, here's the experience of looking at one of these things and seeing how it works. Okay, so imagine introduction, 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 introduction. Now, what we're going to talk about, preview, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right. Now that we know where we're going, let's move on to our first point, which is the good. All right, how do we decide what's good about PowerPoint? What are the things that we like the best about PowerPoint? It turns out that for a lot of people, there are two things that are good. It can be really pretty to look at, and it can be really clear and help you understand what's going on in an otherwise unclear presentation. Right? So now that we know, okay, those are the good things, let's delve deeper into the first, which is how you can make slides pretty. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, now that we've done that, we're moving on to clear, blah, 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 blah. All right, so we've seen that a good PowerPoint can be pretty and it can be clear, and I think those are two of the best things that make PowerPoint good. Now that we've done good, let's move on to our next, which is bad, and then you can see what I would do, right? I would change all those. Now, this isn't the whole PowerPoint. When I got to the pretty section, I would have some content here maybe. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I don't want to say anything. Maybe I just want to talk a little bit, so that when I get to the pretty section, you focus on me. So I'm like, what's important is to make slides pretty. Okay, let's talk about pretty, right? So imagine you're on in the front of the room or whatever. All of a sudden this is blank, right? And they have to look at you. And the ability to make them look at you is really, really powerful. And I can choose that as I go, right? And that's kind of good. Or maybe I want to show you pretty things, right? There's all kinds of pretty things I can show you. And I want to show you examples, right? Well, then all those examples would go in this section. So the way I start a speech, especially if I know what all my points are, I don't start building the PowerPoint until I know what these all are. So then I can organize the whole thing this way, and I would do it all the way through. And then when I'm done, I will add these slides where I put in my content. Maybe I only have one piece of content. I only have one thing I want to show you that's pretty, right? And I only have one thing that I want to show you that's clear, in which case they'll go there. But maybe I want a lot of them, right? Imagine if I get to pretty and I show you 17 examples of different pretty looking PowerPoint things. And then when I get to the end, you're like, wait, okay, that was cool, that was cool. Where are we at again? And then you would want to wrap it up and you want to show me pretty one more time at the end of this so that we just did pretty. Yeah, right? And so I would copy it again. So all of this whole structure, how many of these little slides do you need? How many organizers do you need? All these subpoints, how many repetition slides do you need? It depends on how long everything is, If I just say, hey, things are pretty, here's why things should be pretty. We love pretty things, blah, okay, right? That's clear enough. Now that we've done that, let's move on to clear. I don't need all the slides, but if I'm gonna have many examples, I'm gonna need a slide that lets us know that we finished with the pretty section and we're moving on, right, to the clear section. You need to give us ways to connect with what's going on. Okay, cool enough, right? And so you build it all the way up so that the very last slide is going to be your main summary where you do all this. And so it's kind of iterative design sort of thinking. At the basic level, here's my main point. When I get to the first point, I highlight that we're on this point so that you know where we are. I tell you the pieces of that point, right? And then I sort of take turns heading you through till we get to the next one. And you can imagine what we do when we finish good. Remember, we're doing the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's move on to our next one, which is bad. And then we would focus on this. But I'm not going to do that for you. But you can kind of see how you would build this out. And again, the amount of detail on these subpoints depends on how long your presentation is, how much details in any of these sections. I once had to deliver a 4-hour presentation. That was fun for the audience, I can tell you. And I had like 6 levels, right, where I had to like change the visual environment so people knew where they are, you know. And it was just you just have more to do. If you don't do this, it tells me as an audience member you don't care, right, about my response. You don't care about whether I understand, and you just kind of are just giving me information, you know, like it's all about you. And you're going to turn around, you're going to read your slide to me, and what do I get out of that? Not much, right? So there's not a lot going on there that's helpful. All right. So if all this is to be clear, this is also really boring, right? Like this is really boring. So what if instead of just good, bad, ugly, I showed you, right, an image from that movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and you had someone who was good, someone who was bad, and someone who was ugly. And I could show you the image, and I could say, today we're doing The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of PowerPoint, if you've seen this movie. And then I can select the images as I go, right? So there's lots of ways to do that. You know, let's just talk about a couple ways to manage sort of an image space instead. So now we're moving on to images. Right? Sometimes building organizers on images is way more interesting than building it on something else. So we're going to try to do that. We're going to try to build an image space, and we're going to start from scratch on this one. So I'm going to open up a brand new PowerPoint for you, and we are going to work on the sort of image question. Now, probably what I would do is I would still use a table if I was starting this way, but not always, right? Okay, so let's get a sense of how to do this by grabbing an image for you that might be more metaphorical. One of the ways you might present evidence or present an idea in a PowerPoint is to use a kind of visual environment that has a theme. And it's what I told you not to do at the beginning. Don't use this kind of weird theme, but what if your theme is relevant? Then that's way better, right? That's way better for us. We want to have a relevant theme. So how do we build a relevant theme, and how do we make sure that that theme sort of fits with the mode of what we're doing? Sometimes it's directly related, right? Other times, though, it's kind of metaphorical, right? It doesn't super make sense. So we're going to do an example here based on like student newspapers or student media, and we're going to throw that on there. And so let's say I wanted to have a comparison of things. So sometimes the things themselves sort of make sense, right? So if we're going to compare TLU's student newspaper, right, which is no longer a newspaper, these are all digital, to the Daily Bruin, you know, in California, one of the most well-known, to let's just see what's happening in Europe. This is for the Varsity, which is the the paper at Cambridge University in England. Now, there's lots of ways to organize stuff. It's much easier when you get to something like the V because it seems to make sense shape-wise, whereas that's part of why I did this, because our logo for TLU Student Media is a little odd, right? Normally what will happen is PowerPoint will kind of try to help you figure out whether things are the right size. In this case, the logo itself is a wrong shape because each of these has a background that's a different size. Like that one's perfect, this one is not flush. So you can see, though, how it wants to help you figure out how to put these next to each other with these red lines that tell you, okay, it's centered, there's this equal space between the two. But our problem is the TLU Student Media logo has all this white space. So what we would do is if we were giving a presentation on, we want to talk about student newspapers at a small school like TLU, a big school like USC, and then the oldest school around, Cambridge in Britain, right? That could be a thing that we would do. So how do we, and you can see how they've suggested that we do this, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it a little bit different. So we want these to be able to be treated. Now we can eyeball it, right? You can always like try to eyeball the distance between them and where it goes. But instead, I want to highlight one of the cool things that PowerPoint can do with your images to make this part a little easier. And it's very easy if you have like icons like this. You head over here to the picture format. So when you have an image and you put it up here, you can head over here to the picture format. Before we do, just note, when you're using images on PowerPoint, you should get images of the right size. Don't blow them up too big past their original sort of size so that you get pixely and grainy. And don't stretch them in weird ways, right? Like don't do this. Horrible. And you've seen people do that. If you need a really big image, you need to get on Google and search for a really big image. And there are ways to do that with the Google search tools, which I can show you in a little bit if you need to. But I mean, it's pretty easy enough to find a big image and work with it. But when I want to make images work as sort of like organizer space, I need to head over here to picture format and remove the background. Now, often, and I'll blow this up so you can see it a little bit more, often it's very good at removing a background. And when you have objects like this, but sometimes you have to add, let it know what it's supposed to keep because it doesn't always interpret it. It's like old school Microsoft AI that's not quite great. But on something like this, it's kind of easy to do. And there you go, right? And so now your image, oh, did I keep it? I didn't keep it. Oh, Steve, you're the worst. Let's try again. Remove background, and then we keep the changes. Okay. Now, theoretically, then, it should help us connect up our spacing a little bit better. I guess I didn't realize that this is the way the PowerPoint wants to deal with it. So we're going to have to eyeball. After all that anyway, it's okay. You need to be introduced to that. And so we're going to have to eyeball it, and that's fine. All right. But what we have here is a kind of organizational sort of structure. And I can grab the whole thing and set it up in a way. I can also do it on the bottom. Maybe I want to organize this way, right? And maybe that's a little too large. I want these to be a little smaller so that it looks more connected to, it all fits a little bit easier on the slide. And I want things to look cool. So sometimes you eyeball it and there you go. And these are my main sort of points, right? And so because it's visual, it looks a little more interesting when I come from each one to the other. Right? Now, of course, I can have different kinds of visual images that I use, right? For example, let's say I want to work with this image of Winnie the Pooh. Maybe I think that Winnie the Pooh, and these original images by Ernest Shepard, who drew the original Winnie the Pooh artwork, maybe I think that Winnie the Pooh is symbolic of something that I'm going to talk about. Maybe I'm actually talking about Winnie the Pooh. But if you know Winnie the Pooh, right, how Pooh Bear and Piglet are friends, and Piglet is anxious, but Pooh is kind of relaxed, but he's also into honey. Tigger's woo, jumping up around, right, and Eeyore is sad, right? So you kind of got like general contentment over the, so there's mood here, right? There's a different kind of mood or vibe between these character groups, and you could use these as you go forward. Now, there's a couple ways that you can do this, right? The thing is, if you head over here and you right-click on this, or when you click on the picture and you head over to picture format and you work on size, you'll notice that there are some issues here. First, this is the exact size that it should be. It's 100%. This is as big a thing as we have. I don't really want to stretch it in some cases when it gets too pixelated, but this seems reasonable if I stretched it. So maybe I'll do that and we'll see. And we'll go ahead and do it. But sometimes when you do this, it just doesn't work because it's not quite the right size. But let's take a look and see if it looks decent. That looks decent. Pen and ink, very nice. It's cool. We got this drop shadow around here, which we don't really want. So we can manage that as we go. And I'll show you how to do that up here in the format. And it's here in our picture effects, and it's shadow, and we want no shadow. But it's the image itself has a drop shadow in it. So, oh, sorry about that. So we would have to crop out that drop shadow. So when you have an image, you need to get rid of some stuff. We're going to go over here to the crop menu. And we're just going to grab these things and crop it right to where we need so that we don't have this. A drop shadow is neat, but it doesn't serve our purposes here. And now we have a cropped image. Now, how do we manage the rest of what's going on? Well, okay, there's a couple ways that you can manage it. You can sort of create a shape that's based on the color and try to manage it, or I can just make it go away with a black background. So for example, let's head on over here to our insert menu and learn our another favorite thing. I know this is getting a little longer than the other sections. There's no help for it. Is we make a rectangle. Right? So that's over here in Draw. Insert Shapes, and we're going to make a rectangle. Now, when we right-click it or we head over here to Shape Format, we can edit the shape. Right? We can edit the fill, and we can edit the line. So we're going to get rid of the line. And here's one of the things you can do with the fill is use the eyedropper and we grab that image itself, right? Now this is going to look weird because it's not quite the right color, and then I send this to the back. So I can make the slide look kind of like this. Oh, it's not very good. Let's fill it with a better color in the image. Let's with the outside, right? And so with an image like this, the eyedropper doesn't work quite right, you know? But it could, and we could kind of generate an image that looks kind of close, right? And we'll make this the same height, the same size as our images, and we'll be good to go there. Obviously, if you had an image that took up the whole page, it would be better, but this isn't the worst thing in the world, right? But of course, you could just go ahead and fill the shape with black so that it's just sort of a floating icon there in the middle of nowhere, and that's okay, right? So we'll go with that. Because remember, when it's a projector, anything that's not the PowerPoint screen itself will be black around the edges anyway, so it will disappear. All right, so that's what we have. Let's say that, again, we want to talk about Pooh Bear, we want to talk about Tigger, we want to talk about Eeyore, and we want to sort of like remove the background on these things. So this would be our preview. You'll see all of them. What do we do for the next step? We're going to head over here to Picture Format, and we're going to remove the background. And in this case, we're going to keep Eeyore around. Right? And so I'll zoom it in for you to see. And again, you mark areas to keep, you mark areas to remove. We'll just we'll just add Eeyore back. Oh, here we go. There we have Eeyore. But now we have to remove some stuff. We're going to get rid of Tigger. It's trying its best to figure out what we want. And we just have to sometimes help it really, really closely, and other times not. And that's probably decent enough. And now we have an Eeyore. Okay, cool. So that's nice. And so yeah, that's not bad. And you can do it with the other characters as well. And you can take us through a kind of organizational structure that uses those characters, right? So I can, for example, I've done it with these other characters as well. Now, this is harder because I'm grabbing it and it's the wrong shape and all that kind of stuff, right? But I can take these characters, here in this case, I'm going to copy it, so I have them. And then I'm going to head over here, I'm going to crop out the Tigger on this one. I was trying to save time by doing it like, when you watch a cooking show and somebody else like chops the garlic for them or whatever. I was kind of trying to do that. So I have these 3 images here. So I can focus on the ones that I need. And I can either use them like this, floating in the middle of nowhere, or I can use them on their image itself, And there are various ways that I can do that. So here's simple. Okay. Here's a little bit more complicated. But one of the things that we could do, let me just show you how complicated we can make it, is you can adjust the theme, what this looks like, in order to make pieces of it go away and de-highlight it. It's the other thing that you can do on an image. I can head over here to the picture format, and I can adjust the color. I can do various corrections, right? And I can also do artistic effects, and I can make things darker, kind of neat, kind of creepy, right? Or I can just sort of make them kind of black and white, or in this case, I just kind of want them dark and shadowed, right? And now once I've done this, though, if I want to talk about Tigger first, I have to make sure that I've done it not the way I did it, where I took one so you want them to match exactly, which is easy enough to match exactly if you did the work yourself like this instead of, like you did it on the image itself and it doesn't change size, but I changed the size and it's messed up. But you can highlight Tigger in this space, and if I match this, it'll be a miracle. But in this case, because it's sketch, it's probably okay, right? And so that I can focus, and he jumps. It's not good. He's jumping. I mean, he's Tigger, so it's okay. But, you can go from this to this. And so like now we're going to talk about Tigger. Or you can do this, and you can get rid of these guys, and you can talk about them in the other order. So here's your preview. And now I can order them differently if I want to, right? I have Pooh Bear, I have Tigger, I have Eeyore And the original image had them in a different order, but maybe it's helpful for me to talk about Pooh Bear first. And I can also adjust the size of each character the way I want if they're separate like this. Now Tigger's getting a little bit almost, like he's gonna, well, I'm gonna have to crop those down. And then Eeyore. In order to make these things work, I can set them up. And it ends up being kind of a more interesting way to build the visual space. And then on the next, so that's how I start. My next slide, I get rid of these guys, sorry guys, so that we take you through each one. And of course I can label them if you need to, right? I can, oh, I lost Piglet's leg, I'm sorry. I've been going quickly, right? This is a bad version of Piglet. But, I can do it quickly. I can do it and just hope that you know who Pooh is. I can also add sort of like a little label underneath here if I need to, if it's ambiguous and you're not sure who they are. There's lots of ways I can do it. There's also a variety of different other simple ways to do it visually in case everything I've shown you sounds overwhelmingly difficult. Let's say that I want to break it up according to the personalities of the Marvels, if you're into this film, for example. And they have different personalities if you've seen the Marvels or if you've read the comics. They're very different. And in this case, the image, if it works for me metaphorically, I don't have to do all this other stuff around here. I can instead just work with the image itself and the line that's already existing in the tableau. So if this is what I have, I can easily break it up into these three folks by, again, heading back over to insert my shape. I can grab it. Now I can crop it if I want. I can do all kinds of stuff, but we're going to use a solid black rectangle, which is my favorite thing because it allows you to, and we want a solid fill of black, and we want no line. Because it allows you to hide things very easily, right? Like I just need to find the line where the picture changes, and now I can focus. Right? And I can do the same thing for the other two. And then I just move it around, right? So these are going down here. And so I'll just copy my black rectangle. So whereas if I have a textured background, I have to adjust it. I have to adjust it to make sure that it matches the background. Whereas if your background is plain, you can do tricks like this fairly easily. And then I focus on that one, right? And then I can do the same down here for Monica Rambeau. I know people didn't like this movie very much, but I think they're crazy. It's pretty good. Okay. So I start by saying, which superhero are you? Are you the plucky teenager who's trying to figure out her way? Are you the most powerful being in the galaxy? Or are you a scientist who's recently, whatever you're going to do as you go. And then you go to 1, you go to 2, you go to 3. You'll notice that, for example, if I was going to go over here, if I was going to head over here to the picture format and remove the background, it's very hard to remove the background of a picture, of a photo like this. It's just difficult, and it often leaves weird structures that you don't like. Now, I'm not going to try to fix it, but I am going to say that one of the things you can do if you're trying to crop a real-life image, you can head over here to the soft edges on the picture effects, and it looks kind of creepy to do it this way, right? But it can also create something that looks a little bit less like you're doing really bad Photoshop editing on PowerPoint as you go. So in this case, I might do this as well, right? Now, so I might break you up into the Ms. Marvel, right? Captain, I might break you up into those pieces, and then when I got to this section, I would then maybe have another way of giving you the information that you need, right? I might have a text for the subpoints as we go, and there's all sorts of ways I can do that. I can do it with the table, or I can do it with, I told you not to, but a text box. But you could sometimes do it. And when you get to the Captain Marvel section, which is about how you create an amazing high-powered speech, you can talk about tables. You can talk about images. Right? And these are some of the things you want to do. Notice that I have to go back if I want 20th Century MT, but we'll just go ahead and use our whatever, this terrible font. And I can just have it down here so that it shows up this way for each of them, shows up right to the left. I could also make it happen on top of them, right? And in case you wanted to do this, I would make it a nice little strip so that it covers the bottom. Looks like I'm doing it on purpose. And then this text box, I can head on over here to the shape format. If I click the text box, and it lets me fill it. So I want a solid fill, and I can also do transparency here. I can do gradients, but I can do something like this. And I can do this for each of them. And I can do all kinds of stuff. I can put that centered if I wish, so that when I get here, you'll know what the subpoints are as we move through. So I'm not telling you one of these is right or wrong. There's lots of ways to go ahead and do that. But you generally want to think about, the text-oriented things that we were doing before is reasonably boring. And if you can add some elements to it, it's a little more interesting, and it helps your audience pay attention, and you're creating a visual environment that you care about. Now, if I was using the Marvels, I might, instead of black, use a kind of a space background. I might do something that's not too intrusive, but has a kind of vague sort of element that seems to sort of fit what's going on. If I'm over here with Winnie the Pooh, these are the old drawings from the book 100 years ago. I could place these guys on the New York City skyline or whatever. I could put them wherever I want, depending on what kind of emphasis I want to do in different places. And these aren't going to stay here the whole time. Remember, these are just your organizers helping you out. Okay, one more thing I want to do before we finish with images, and we'll finish up this particular sort of introduction as you go. When you have information on the PowerPoint, you need to cite it. You need to cite it on the slide. When you're presenting a speech, you should be citing verbally the sources that you have. Like this is from the New York Times, and that's from Dr. Vrooman's book, so that we feel, you're credible. Most of us don't do that. Most of us we don't see speeches that cite their sources, because we live in a kind of world where we pretend that that's ugly and we hide it and it's weird. And that sounds bizarre to me, because honesty is always useful. And maybe that's why we're in a world where people don't know what's true, because, honesty has been so devalued. You being able to document your honesty is really useful, but you don't want to have to tell us where the images come from, right? Because that's just too much. You don't want to have to be like, this is from, these images are from natesanders.com. This is where I got these, all right? You don't want to have to say this out loud, and it doesn't make sense anyway. Right? So when you have an image, you do need a citation the first time, but it doesn't have to take over the world. It can be super small. So I'm going to make this much smaller, and I would generally, I'd probably justify it to the right, and I would have my citation just kind of show up down here as we go. And in this case, let's say this was my first slide. As I kept using the images, I would let it go away, right? We don't have to constantly keep this citation up. Just the first time you see it, it's there. Is anybody going to go click over onto that? Probably not. But over time, it lets them know where you have things. And when you have numerical data or some other stuff that we'll talk about in another whole video, having that citation down there is important. If you have a link shortener like tinyurl or bit.ly, it's sometimes really nice to have the links down there, so that people can actually type it in while they're in the room if you want, So if it's a bit.ly link, and you can customize those links. So if it's like bit.ly/poo icons, they can go look at these on your own. Or if it's like an actual source of data instead, you've made a graph or a chart, and you want people to be able to go to the source of that data, like a Pew Research poll or something, and you want, instead of the long thing that they can't type, it can be bit.ly/Steve's Pew thing, and then they can find it really easily. The other thing that I do, especially if you have a blog or a website or whatever, is you just make a page in your blog or your website that has all the information and all the links for this. It's like a link tree when you go to Instagram, so that the link is there, and you can even have that link at the beginning, and maybe let it show up every once in a while again. In case at the beginning you show me your kind of link structure, and I'm like, I don't care to see any of that. But then halfway through you start giving me data, and I'm like, wait, I want to investigate that. Then, just every once in a while, just be like, and again, if you want to look at the information or find where the photos are, it's all right here. And then when they go to that page, and it's a shortened one, then you'll have other links to all the other pieces, so that if they're on their phone, or you're in a workshop sort of space where they're on their computer, they can go to those things and explore it on their own, and so that they feel like you're very honest, because you're sharing it all with them, and they have the power to go and investigate it themselves while you're curating a certain version of it for them up here at the top. Okay, so that's kind of our vibe on where we're at and how we're building our PowerPoint sort of space. So we did the basic setup here, how to build a slide, the organizers, how to connect them together, and then how to manage images as best you can. And this is only scratching the surface. There's a bunch of other things you can do in terms of organizers. There's a bunch of other things you can do in terms of images, and there's even a lot of the more stuff you can do on individual slides. But as a basic orientation to how to build a speech, this is a reasonable place to start. And that's our presentation for today. So, blank slate. Now, we don't want that. We really would want it to just be black, so it's not telling you I'm done, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can leave, I could leave, I could leave, I could leave, I could leave. We'd rather it was just black. We'd rather it look like this. And now you don't know what's going to happen, and I'm telling you, hey, we're finished now. And hopefully this helps you get started on your PowerPoint, and hopefully you feel like you have a little more control over what's going on. Thanks a lot, and good